It's been very interesting studying the last week about neuroscience and cognitive science as it is applied to the K-12 classroom. I'm going to be discussing a common myth, what teachers have done to try to deal with this mythology, and then some practical research-based tools that teachers can learn. The myth that I'm going to be talking about is that of no child left behind. Anyone who has taught in the last 20 years is very familiar with the concept that high stakes testing, standardized testing, was going to close the achievement gap for students and improve their performance. Now, the very first people to know that this was not going to work were classroom teachers. In fact, the minute it was rolled out, teachers were aghast at the fact that this was the direction that education was going at a national level. The mythology was fairly quickly exposed not to be true. There were good elements of No Child Left Behind. The intention was good, but the idea that high-stakes standardized testing was actually going to improve performance among students just wasn't going to work, and it didn't work. So the good news is the myth of No Child Left Behind has been completely debunked. As a nation, we're in the process of implementing a new ESSA plan, and states right now are hard at work at figuring out all the details of how can we actually ensure that our students are learning. So this topic is very relevant to a shift that is currently happening within our classrooms across all states here in the United States. Now, teachers realized that this wasn't working. High-stakes standardized testing wasn't going to actually increase learning. And they have been, because they are passionate, always looking for ways to help their students and solutions. Now, the field of cognitive research and neuroscience has been growing over the past 2 decades, particularly as applied to education. The problem is, though, that it's a relatively young science as applied to the classroom, and teachers would just get snippets, bits and pieces at a professional development day, and perhaps not really have the full understanding of how to help a student learn. And this allowed other mythologies to develop and other practices that perhaps weren't incredibly effective to take root in our classrooms. You could ask, why didn't neuroscience, why hasn't it been included yet in teacher education programs? Why is this not seen as a very important study for our teachers as it should be? One reason is that there were some turf wars going on between the neuroscientists themselves and the cognitive scientists, and also just the lack of laboratories, the lack of actual classrooms where they could do the research that would really be necessary. And so those are some things that we can actually look to changing, would be to broaden the research, deepen the research around cognitive and neuroscience to help all of our students learn. And this will help teachers not to just be following the latest trend, but to be able to root their instruction in research-based data. Now, one of the very good outcomes that we were able to study was research-based ways to help students learn, and this is information that would be very, very valuable to classroom teachers. And in this particular study done by John Dunlowski and Catherine Rawson and other authors, they looked at 10 different study techniques and very carefully analyzed them to say what is the most effective. Now, what's interesting is most students said that their favorite technique for studying was to reread or to highlight. And those are the least effective study methods. And so you can see that there's a real need within the classroom and among all learners to understand the very most effective ways to study. And so what we have in this study are some very practical methods for teachers to use. And one of the readings, several of the readings that we've been doing this week have focused on the fact that with testing, pre-testing, self-testing, that you can actually learn quite a lot. Now, this is interesting. I started this discussion saying high-stakes standardized testing really didn't work, but yet we come back to the concept that testing used correctly, assessments used very deliberatively, actually can help learning. And these are tests that are given with immediate feedback, tests that students can use when they're studying themselves, pre-testing with immediate feedback. This is the most effective way that you can study. Now also, distributive practice was a method that teachers can use with a high level of confidence that it is research-based and that it is going to actually increase their students' performance. So we've traveled the road from looking at what hasn't worked for education, and the good news is we're on the way to finding research-based, effective tools that could be used in the classroom. What do we need? We need laboratory classrooms. We need the research to continue. Funding for that research is very important. And then we need our teacher training programs to embrace this science and to actually have that inform their teaching techniques. It's an amazing toolbox that we can give teachers, one that will lower disparities, will increase student performance, and more importantly, really help students to learn. Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation, from mythology to solutions, and hopefully what we'll see in the next few years, these changes take place in our public education system. Thanks so much. I'm Susan Bonilla, and enjoyed having this conversation with you. Thanks.